Tucker edited that out of the program completely, and then he issued a video apology. I think he was covering himself in that, but that was reckless. And that's the kind of thing that he does.
There's been much talk, and I know, Ambassador Huckabee, you just had this famous or infamous, however you look at it, interview with Tucker Carlson, who is obviously engaged in framing the situation through a certain lens. So I'd love for you to talk about that.
Well, it's pretty obvious if you look around the Middle East, the Christian population has been decimated. There are very few Christians left in many of these countries. Now, Tucker tries to say, oh, Qatar has a lot of Christians. What Tucker didn't tell you was that those Christians live in basically what amounts to a ghetto. They're only people who are there to be service workers. They can't leave the compound. They cannot worship freely. They cannot wear a cross. They cannot pray in public. There is no religious freedom there. In fact, they can get in serious trouble, and be punished brutally if they practice their faith as openly as I practice mine in Israel. Let's look at Bethlehem, just across the border. The worst thing that ever happened to the Palestinian people was Oslo. In Bethlehem, it used to be 80+% Christian, handful of Muslims, and a few others of various faiths. Today, that has split. It's now over 80% Muslim, 12 to 15% Christian. And the Christians weren't run out by Jews. They were run out by Muslims. And by the way, I tried to explain to Tucker, you know how many Jews live in Bethlehem? None. Not one Jew lives in Bethlehem. Don't blame Jews or Christians, for that matter, for what's happened there if you talk about the Palestinian Christians. And there are no Israelis who can even go into Bethlehem. There's a sign as you enter that says, if you're an Israeli, you are prohibited from going in. I can go because I'm an American, but Kalev, who is Israeli, he can't even cross that border and go into the city of Bethlehem. So this is the kind of nonsense that people are just unaware of. In the meantime, you have an open society in Israel. People, they elect their government. That's refreshing. But then they can criticize their government. And boy, oh boy, do they ever do it here. Only the United States is equal in electing people and then spending their entire term in office chewing them up and spitting them out. But that's really the sign of a healthy democracy. If you criticize the government and someone comes to your home tonight and takes you to jail or shoots you, that's not democracy. If you have the freedom to criticize your government and you still wake up and have breakfast the next day, you might be in a pretty unique place in the Middle East. In fact, you're going to only be in one place in the Middle East. You're in Israel.
But what's happening on the public front for these entities, and there are many of these voices that are emerging that are extremely highly critical of Israel with a level of scrutiny that I think is, of course, based on extreme bias, where people like Tucker will take a solitary or a very fringe incident. These incidents of, Christian clergy, maybe in the old city, somebody gets spit on or something like that. And he'll use it to frame an entire society around it. So can you just talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the way Tucker characterizes the treatment of Christians here is utterly disingenuous. When you speak a half-truth as if it is the whole truth, it becomes an untruth. And that's what Tucker Carlson is so guilty of. He takes something, an incident, he then magnifies it as if it is the norm and creates a frame in which he says, this is how it happens all the time. So he says, there are Christians who have been spit on in the old city. Okay, it's happened. And you know who condemns it? The prime minister does, the president does, the president of Israel, the foreign minister does, the Knesset does. Universally, it's condemned. Nobody applauds this. It is no different than when someone is walking on the streets of New York wearing a kippah and is spat upon by the Free Palestine crazies. So it's obnoxious behavior, it's criminal behavior, it's punishable behavior, and I find it repulsive. But it doesn't happen to many people very often, and when it does, it happens at the hands of people who are universally shunned and considered totally out of line. So that's why I find it so very unacceptable for Tucker Carlson to try to present it that if you're a Christian, you better not walk around and let anyone know you are, because you're not likely to make it very well, and you'll be spit on and maybe have the stuffing beat out of you. Well, that's just not true. Look, I've been talking about how many times I've been here and how long now I've lived here. Nobody's ever heckled me. Nobody's ever spit on me. I think most people in Israel know that I'm an evangelical Christian believer. I've never had someone come up on the street and say, I wish you'd go back home. Now, interestingly, I've had Orthodox Jews, I've had secular Jews come up, shake my hand, want to take a picture with me, and thank me for being their friend. And that's what I experience, not someone trying to hit me with a club or spit on me. That has not ever been my experience. And I think it is the experience of very few people. It is a safe place for Christians to be. I go to church every Sunday here in Israel. I find that I'm surrounded by people who love Jesus and they talk about him openly, freely, pray in his name. Nobody comes in and says, if you ever say that again, we're taking you down to the jail. It doesn't work like that. And I feel no intimidation whatsoever being a Christian. In fact, I have people that even say to me, we're glad you are a Christian and not Jewish, because if you were to take the positions you take in support of the Jewish people, in support of the state of Israel and our relationship with the United States, and if you were to do that as a Jew, everybody would say, yeah, what's he going to do? He's Jewish. He's part of the tribe. We don't have much choice. When I say it, people say, you don't have to say that. How come you do? And I say, because I believe it, because I've witnessed it. I am an eyewitness to the power of what God has done in this country. I think it has more impact.
And so you see Tucker framing Israel in a negative light, but he uses the same modus operandi. It's a form of psyops when he's describing places like Qatar, and he'll say that it's a free society, and he's buying a home there, and there are more Christians in Qatar than there are in Israel. So he's doing the same thing and using a half truth and portraying it as the whole truth in a positive way in a very, very dark place like Qatar.
Well, it's characteristic of how Tucker is engaging not just in that one issue, but in so many issues. He takes a straw man and he builds it up, and it's based on a lot of innuendo and sometimes reckless allegations. In the interview he did with me, he made a very reckless allegation against President Isaac Herzog, saying he was on Epstein's island. Well, he wasn't. He was in Tel Aviv speaking in front of 1,000 people on the day that he was supposed to be there. It wasn't even his full name. It wasn't Isaac Herzog. It was just the last name Herzog. Could have been anybody. But the point is, he openly said that it was President Herzog who was there. Now, when the president, I think, threatened a lawsuit of defamation, and I hope he files it, quite frankly. I think it would be lovely if he did. Tucker edited that out of the program completely, and then he issued a video apology. I think he was covering himself in that, but that was reckless. And that's the kind of thing that he does. He made the ridiculous allegation about a young boy in Gaza being shot by an IDF soldier. Now, he had this guy named Tony Aguilar on his program who had been fired by GHF. They didn't want him back. They were ready to get rid of him. And he said, if you don't hire me back, I'm going to come after you guys. Well, they didn't hire him back because there was no way they were going to. He was a horrible employee. So he made up this ridiculous story that he watched an IDF soldier shoot a little boy. What he didn't realize was that little boy, we found him less than a week later after the allegation. We extricated him out of Gaza, got him to a safe place, took 4 countries involved to get it done. Very delicate operation. I was heavily involved on a personal level, so I knew the details very well. And when I explained that to Tucker, his response was, well, Aguilar believed it was true. And I said, Tucker, this is not an acceptable response. If you see someone shoot a little boy, you're not just mistaken about seeing that. You either saw that and you will stick to that story, or you're lying about it. And it was that kind of thing that Tucker is very good at.
If you have a 401k or an IRA, please listen. Gold is at record highs. What many people don't know is this: you can move part of your retirement money legally and without tax penalties into physical gold you actually own. Alpha Omega Gold helps you do this through a gold IRA. Your gold is real. It is stored safely. It is in your name. Learn more at ao.gold/stand. Alpha Omega Gold is our sponsor, and they proudly stand with Israel.